A lone guard patrols the tomb of the unknowns. Suddenly, a spectral World War I soldier appears, pointing into the fog with desperate eyes. What do you do when the dead you're sworn to protect break their silence? The fog over Arlington was a physical presence, a cold, wet blanket that clung to the marble and swallowed sound. It flowed like liquid mercury through the endless rows of white headstones, muffling the distant, ghostly hum of traffic on the Memorial Bridge. For specialist Leo Martinez, the fog was an unwanted partner in the unholiest hours of the morning. 21 steps. The clicks of his steel-tapped boots were sharp, a defiant rhythm against the crushing silence. Heel, toe. Heel, toe. The M14 rifle, a solid, 9.5-pound weight of wood and steel, was an old friend against his shoulder. His face, reflected ghost-like in the polished black stone of the plaza, was a mask of pure discipline. Black hair, sharp jaw, eyes fixed forward. A sentinel of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment. The old guard. But tonight, the discipline felt brittle. At 2:17 a.m. on his first solo night rotation, the cemetery's profound quiet felt wrong. It felt thin, stretched taut over something else. Something waiting. Just exhaustion, he told himself, his breath pluming in the frigid air. You've been training for this for a year. Don't crack now. He could almost hear his drill instructor's voice, a gravelly roar in his memory. Your mind is the last line of defense, Martinez. Your bearing is your armor. He executed a flawless turn at the end of the mat, his movements crisp and economical. And then he saw it. Out of the corner of his eye, just beyond the stanchions and their velvet ropes, a flicker. Not a trick of the light. It was a shape, a figure standing beside the amphitheater steps. It was pixelated at first, like a bad video feed, a distortion in the thick, swirling mist. Leo's heart gave a single, violent thud against his ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. His training screamed at him, do not react. Your sector is the tomb. Nothing else exists. He continued his walk. 21 steps. Each one an act of war against the panic clawing at his throat. He felt the figure's presence like a drop in temperature, a cold spot in the already freezing night. When he reached the other side of the mat and turned again, it was gone. The space was empty, filled only by the patient, hungry fog. Just the damn fog, he muttered under his breath, the word swallowed instantly. It plays tricks. It's a long night. He tightened his grip on the rifle's stock, the familiar texture grounding him. But the armor of his discipline now had a hairline crack. The next night, the fog returned, thicker and more oppressive. Leo stepped onto the plaza feeling a dread he hadn't known since his final test for the guard. He told himself it was his imagination, that he was letting the graveyard's reputation get to him. But at 2:19 a.m., it happened again. The figure was back. This time, it was closer. Standing right at the edge of the public viewing area, almost as if it had bought a ticket. And it wasn't pixelated anymore. It was horribly, terrifyingly clear. A soldier. Dressed in the olive drab wool uniform of the Great War, the kind Leo had only ever seen in grainy, sepia-toned photographs. A flat helmet sat on his head, and his legs were wrapped in puttees. Leo could see the faded, V-shaped chevron of a private on his sleeve. The soldier's face was young, impossibly young, maybe 19, and as pale as the marble sarcophagus behind Leo. Mud, or what looked like it, was caked on his boots and the hem of his greatcoat. But it was the eyes that shattered Leo's composure. Last night, they had seemed hollow. Tonight, they were filled with a soul-crushing, desperate plea. The young soldier stared directly at Leo, not with malice, but with an urgency that felt like a physical blow. A single, perfect tear traced a path down his ghostly cheek. Leo's breath hitched. He wanted to shout, to challenge the intruder, to follow protocol for an unauthorized presence on the plaza. But how do you challenge a man who has been dead for a century? The conflict between his training and his senses was a visceral, tearing force inside him. He felt a tremor in his hands, a shocking betrayal by his own body. He held his ground, finished his 21 steps, and turned. When his eyes swept back over the spot, there was nothing. Only the cold, indifferent stone and the ever-present fog. The crack in his armor had just split wide open. By the third night, Leo was a wreck. Before his shift, he stood in the guardhouse, a small, brightly lit sanctuary against the encroaching dark. He adjusted his uniform in the mirror, but his hands betrayed him with a slight, persistent tremor as he straightened his guard insignia. The doorframe creaked. Sergeant Isabella Rossi stood there, arms crossed over her chest. At 32, Rossi was a legend in the unit. She moved with an unnerving quietness and had a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect bun, and her uniform was so crisp it looked like it could cut you. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Martinez," she said, her voice dry as dust. Leo forced a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Maybe I have, Sergeant." He tried to keep it light. "Ever see anything weird out there? In the fog?" Rossi's eyebrow arched a single, questioning millimeter. She stepped into the room, her presence immediately commanding the space. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let her eyes drift over Leo's gear, a subtle inspection that made his skin crawl. "Your cadence was off by half a second last night, Specialist," she stated, not asked. The use of his rank was a clear warning. "Twice. Is there something you need to report?" The casual question was gone. This was official. The pressure in the room became immense. "No, Sergeant," Leo said, his voice a little too quick. "Just tired. Getting used to the rotation." Rossi studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment, her eyes searching for the truth. He felt transparent. Finally, her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Arlington has stories, Leo," she said, her tone shifting from commander to mentor. "Old guards talk. Shadows in the trees, whispers on the wind. It comes with the territory. But whatever you think you see, it cannot affect those 21 steps. That walk is a promise we make to them, and to ourselves. Are we clear?" "Crystal, Sergeant," Leo nodded, relief washing over him. "Good. Now get your head straight and get out there." But her words stuck to him like the damp cold as he stepped back onto the plaza. "A promise we make to them." The fog was waiting for him. And so was the soldier. It was 2:21 a.m. He appeared in the same spot, his form solid, his pleading eyes locking onto Leo's across the stone expanse. Leo's pulse hammered in his ears, a frantic counter-rhythm to the disciplined click of his boots. He held the soldier's gaze, his fear now mingled with a strange, defiant curiosity. Then, the soldier moved. He slowly raised a spectral hand, his fingers stiff with cold or rigor mortis. He didn't wave. He pointed. A single, deliberate, unshakable point, directing Leo's attention toward a specific, darkened section of the cemetery far beyond the tomb. Just as he pointed, a gust of wind, impossibly cold, swirled across the plaza, cutting through Leo's uniform. And on that wind, a whisper, so faint it was more a feeling than a sound, brushed against his ear. "Find." Leo froze mid-step, a cardinal sin. He caught himself, finished his turn, but his eyes were fixed on the spot. The soldier was gone. The wind died. There was only silence. He stared into the darkness where the ghost had pointed. "What?" he whispered to the empty night. "What do you want me to find?" The next morning, sleep-deprived and haunted, he called his grandfather. Abuelo Mateo lived an hour away, a proud World War II veteran cocooned in a small house filled with memories. His voice, warm and crackling with age, was a lifeline. "What's eating you, Mijo?" Mateo asked immediately, bypassing pleasantries. Leo hesitated, then the words spilled out, the figure, the uniform, the pleading eyes, the pointing. "Abuelo, Am I losing my mind? Is this real? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Leo's stomach twisted. Then, his grandfather spoke, his voice low and serious. In the winter of '44, in the Ardennes forest, we were freezing, starving, and surrounded. One night, my buddy, a kid from Chicago, grabbed my arm, his eyes wide as plates. He swore he saw his little brother, who had been killed on D-Day, standing at the edge of the woods. The kid was pointing. He was pointing away from the path our sergeant wanted to take. Mateo paused, letting the story sink in. We thought he was delirious. But he wouldn't shut up. He made such a scene the sergeant finally gave in, took us down the other path. An hour later, we heard the German patrol ambush the exact spot where we would have been. His ghost brother saved our entire platoon. Leo's grip on his phone tightened. War leaves echoes, Leo, his grandfather continued. Those boys at Arlington, the unknowns, their stories were lost in the chaos. If no one speaks their name, they don't rest easy. This soldier, he's not showing himself to scare you. He's asking you for something. He's asking you to listen. Listen to what? Leo asked, his voice thick. To his story, Abuelo Mateo said softly. Find out who he is. Give him back his name. The phone call with his abuelo changed everything. Fear was replaced by a sense of mission. Leo wasn't being haunted, he was being recruited. His off-duty hours transformed into a relentless, obsessive hunt. He started at the National Archives website, a frustrating digital maze of outdated Flash plugins and slow-loading PDF files. He spent hours in his barracks room, the glow of his phone the only light, pinching and zooming on scanned, handwritten casualty reports from the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the last major Allied push of World War I. The names were a blur, thousands of them, each one a life extinguished too soon. His search drew unwanted attention. One afternoon, Specialist Jackson, a fellow guard with a perpetually cynical smirk, saw him hunched over his laptop in the common area. Dude, what are you cramming for? A history exam? Jackson asked, nudging Leo's screen. On it was a list of American cemeteries in France. Chasing ghosts, Martinez. You should be polishing your brass, man. That's what's real. Leo just shook his head, closing the laptop. Something like that. The casual mockery only fueled his determination. He was alone in this. Days bled into a week. Every night on duty, the soldier would appear, silent, watching. He never pointed again, he just stood there, his presence a constant, pleading question. During his patrols, Leo started talking to him, quiet whispers shielded from the security cameras. I'm trying, he'd murmur, turning at the end of the mat. There are so many. I need more. The answer came on a frigid, starless night. As Leo stood watch, the soldier appeared, closer than ever. He stepped from the shadows and onto the sacred plaza itself. Leo's heart hammered, but he held his ground, his gaze locked with the spirits. Show me, Leo whispered, his voice raw. Please. Show me. The world dissolved. It wasn't a memory, it was a full-body immersion. The pristine marble of the tomb was gone, replaced by the sucking, ice-cold mud of a trench. The air, thick with the smell of cordite, iron, and wet wool, burned his lungs. The rhythmic click of his boots was drowned out by the deafening, percussive roar of artillery and the high-pitched shriek of bullets tearing through the air. He looked down at his hands. They weren't his own. They were pale and thin, clutching a letter written on flimsy paper. Dear Ma, I'll be home by Christmas. Don't you worry. A scream tore through the chaos. He felt the soldier's, body lurch. A voice shouted, Will. Get down. But it was too late. A shell exploded nearby, a blinding flash of white-hot light and earth-shattering sound. He felt a searing, white-hot pain rip through his abdomen. He was falling, the sky and mud spinning into a horrifying vortex. His last conscious act was to clutch the letter to his chest, a final, desperate connection to a world he was leaving forever. Then, blackness. Leo staggered back, gasping, catching himself on his rifle. He was back on the plaza, the night still and quiet again. His own stomach ached with a phantom agony. He was drenched in a cold sweat, his body trembling uncontrollably. He saw it. He saw it all. The ghost soldier stood before him, his image faint now, almost peaceful. The pleading in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of profound gratitude. He raised his hand one last time, pointing not to the distant graves, but to his own uniform pocket, where the letter had been. Then, he faded completely, dissolving into the fog like smoke. Shaking, Leo stumbled back to the guardhouse at the end of his shift. He knew what he had to look for now. Not a name. A detail. He dove back into the digital archives, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He wasn't searching for casualty lists anymore. He was searching for inventories of personal effects found on unidentified soldiers. Hours later, his eyes burning from staring at the screen, he found it. A single line in a faded report from 1919, describing the effects of an unknown soldier recovered from the Musargon sector. Item 1, one partial letter, water damaged. Text legible, Dear Ma, be home by Christmas. Item 2, scrap of paper tucked in pocket. Single word written in pencil, Will. Item 3, Pennsylvania state-issued dog tag, name portion destroyed. Leo's breath caught in his throat. Will. Pennsylvania. 1918. I found you, he whispered to the empty room. Will. I found you. Finding the name, or at least, a fragment of it, was only the beginning. Leo knew he couldn't carry this alone. He needed help, official help. The next day, he made an appointment with Dr. Alina Petrova, a civilian historian who worked with Arlington's extensive records department. Dr. Petrova's office was a fortress of books and neatly organized files. She was a stern woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of academic precision. She listened to Leo's story with polite, unwavering patience, her hands steepled on her desk. When he finished, she gave him a thin, clinical smile. Specialist Martinez, she began, her tone professional and dismissive, that's a compelling narrative. It's also a classic manifestation of stress-induced sympathetic hallucination. The details you describe, the uniform, the trench, are all readily available in historical texts. Your mind, under immense pressure, has simply created a story to cope. It wasn't a story, ma'am, Leo insisted, leaning forward. It was real. I felt it. I'm sure you did, she said coolly. But feelings are not historical data. Unless you have more than a ghost story, I'm afraid I can't help you. Leo's hope began to crumble. He had come this far, only to be blocked by a wall of academic skepticism. He thought back to the vision, to the intense, overwhelming details. He remembered the letter. The letter he was writing, Leo said suddenly. The ink. It was Higgins' Eternal Black ink. The Army had a contract with them starting in 1917 because it was waterproof. He had it in a small glass bottle with a cork stopper, not a metal tin. And his pen, it was a cheap tin dip pen, but the nib was from a brand called Esterbrook. A Falcon 048. It was his favorite. Dr. Petrova froze, her hand hovering over a stack of papers. She stared at him, her professional mask finally cracking. The details Leo provided were incredibly obscure, the kind of minutiae known only to the most dedicated World War I researchers or curators. They weren't in any popular history book. How could you possibly know that, she whispered. Because I was there, Leo said, his voice quiet but certain. For the first time, Dr. Petrova looked at him not as a stressed soldier, but as a source. A shiver seemed to run down her spine. She pulled a notepad towards her. "Tell me again," she said, her skepticism replaced by a sudden, intense curiosity. "Tell me everything." With Dr. Petrova now a tentative ally, Leo knew he had to bring it up the chain of command. He needed official sanction. He requested a meeting with his commanding officer, Major Davies, and asked Sergeant Rossi to be there. Major Davies' office was sparse and intimidating. He was a man who lived by the book, his face a permanent mask of bureaucratic caution. He listened to Leo's proposal, a project to research the stories of the unknowns and hold small ceremonies to honor them by name, starting with, "Will from Pennsylvania." Davies's reaction was exactly what Leo feared. "Absolutely not, specialist," he said, shaking his head before Leo even finished. "It's unprecedented. It opens a Pandora's box of spiritualist nonsense. We are soldiers, not ghost hunters. This memory project, as you call it, is a non-starter. It risks making a mockery of the tomb." The air in the room grew heavy. Leo's heart sank. This was it. The end of the road. But then Sergeant Rossi, who had been standing silently in the corner, spoke up. "Sir," she said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm but laced with steel. "With all due respect, the specialist is not making a mockery of the tomb. He's fulfilling its highest purpose." Davies turned to her, annoyed. "And what purpose is that, Sergeant?" "Our job description is to guard the tomb, sir. We walk our 21 steps. We keep our uniforms perfect. We maintain our bearing. But our duty is to remember. We are guarding the memory of every soldier whose name has been lost. Martinez isn't chasing ghosts. He's doing the real work of a sentinel. He's giving one of them back his name." She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. "Let him try. If you won't sanction it, I'll organize it myself, in my off-duty hours." It was an incredible risk, a direct challenge to her CO's authority. Major Davies stared at her, then at Leo, seeing the fierce resolve in both of them. The silence stretched for an eternity. Finally, with a heavy sigh of resignation, Davies relented. "Fine," he grumbled, rubbing his temples. "One ceremony. Unofficial. Low profile. And if I get so much as one phone call about seances at Arlington, I'm shutting it down. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir," Leo and Rossi said in unison. They had their chance. The first ceremony was held at dusk on a chilly November evening. It was small, informal, exactly as Major Davies had demanded. There was no press, no fanfare. Just a small crowd of about 20 people gathered in the fading light before the tomb, a handful of off-duty sentinels, a few curious tourists who had lingered, and a couple of white-haired veterans in VFW hats who had heard about it through the grapevine. Sergeant Rossi stood at the back, a silent, supportive presence. Major Davies was also there, watching from a distance, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Leo stood before the sarcophagus, a single piece of paper trembling in his hand. The plaza lights hummed to life, casting a reverent glow on the white marble. He took a deep breath, the cold air steadying him. "Private William Harper," he began, his voice amplified slightly by the plaza's acoustics. Dr. Petrova's research, spurred by Leo's details, had found him, a 19-year-old from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Missing in action, October 1918. No body recovered. He was born in 1899, Leo continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident. He worked on his family's farm. He dreamed of being a teacher. He wrote letters to his mother, promising to come home by Christmas. He died in the Meuse-Argonne, fighting for a country he loved and a future he would never see. For over a century, his name was lost to the mud and the chaos of war. But tonight, we remember him. Tonight, he is not unknown. He finished, and a profound silence settled over the plaza. It was broken by a single, stifled sob from one of the veterans. An older woman wiped a tear from her cheek. Leo felt a weight lift from his own shoulders, a sense of completion so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He glanced toward the spot where Will's ghost had always appeared. The space was empty. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely and utterly alone on the plaza. And it felt peaceful. That night, the soldier did not appear. Nor the next. The memory project, however, began to grow a life of its own. What started as a single ceremony became a monthly tradition. Other guards, moved by the story, began volunteering, including, to Leo's surprise, Specialist Jackson. He came to Leo one day, sheepishly handing him a worn piece of paper. "Found this in a World War I vet's diary I read online," he mumbled. "Just a fragment. Maybe Dr. Petrova can use it." The project spread. Leo and Dr. Petrova created a small website, a simple page where they posted the stories they uncovered. Soon, they received an email from a history teacher in Oregon. She had used Will Harper's story in her class and sent a photo of her students, each holding a small flower. The ripples were turning into waves. A year later, Leo, now a sergeant himself, stood his post at the tomb. The memory project had become an official, if quiet, part of the old guard's duties. As he walked his 21 steps, the fog rolling in just as it had on that first night, he saw a small figure at the edge of the plaza. It was a young girl, maybe 10 years old, holding the hand of a man in a wheelchair. The girl, Lily, stepped forward and carefully placed a single white rose at the base of the tomb. Her father watched, his face lined with age but his eyes filled with a fierce pride. As Leo completed his patrol, his shift ending, he felt compelled to approach them. "That was a beautiful flower," Leo said gently to the girl. She looked up, her eyes bright and unafraid. "It's for the soldiers," she said. "All the ones nobody knew." The father, Mr. Chen, a Chinese-American veteran in a worn Vietnam vet cap, extended a hand. "Thank you for what you do, Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet but strong. "My friend, Danny, was lost in the jungle. Mia. They never found him. For 50 years, he had no name, until projects like yours made people remember that all the lost deserve a voice. So, thank you." Leo's throat tightened. He could only nod, bringing his hand up in a sharp salute. Mr. Chen returned it with a nod of his own, a silent understanding passing between two generations of soldiers. As they moved away, Leo turned back to the tomb, the white marble glowing softly in the twilight. "We hear you, Will," he whispered. "We hear all of you." The encounter with Lily and Mr. Chen solidified something in Leo. The memory project wasn't just about the past, it was about healing the present. That weekend, he drove to his parents' house, a quiet suburban home that always seemed filled with unspoken words. He found his father, Carlos, in the kitchen, meticulously chopping vegetables. Carlos Martinez was a good man, but the war in Iraq had built a wall around him, a wall his family didn't know how to breach. "Dad?" Leo began, his voice hesitant. Can we talk? About Fallujah?" Carlos froze, the knife still in his hand. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Leo expected to be shut down, as he always was. But after a long moment, his father slowly set the knife down, wiped his hands on a towel, and sat at the small kitchen table. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "All right, Mijo," he said, his voice thick with an emotion Leo had never heard before. "Let's talk." For hours, the stories spilled out. Stories of the suffocating heat, the constant fear, the bonds of brotherhood, and the friend Carlos had lost in a dusty alley, a memory he had carried alone for 2 decades. In return, Leo shared everything, Will's story, the vision in the trench, the feeling of a duty that stretched back through time. For the first time, they weren't just father and son. They were soldiers, speaking the same difficult language of service and loss, their shared understanding finally dismantling the wall, brick by brick. Months later, Sergeant Leo Martinez stood before a new group of Tomb Guard recruits. Their faces were a mixture of eagerness, pride, and sheer terror. He remembered feeling the exact same way. He didn't give them a long speech. He just gave them the truth. "You will see things here." "Hear things," he said, his voice steady and clear, echoing in the briefing room. "The question is not, are they real? The question is, what will you do about it? Remember, you are not guarding a stone. You are guarding their silence. And sometimes, our duty is to break that silence. Listen to them. Remember them. That's what makes you a sentinel." As he walked away, a young private called out, "Sergeant Martinez. You ever, see anything out there? Like the stories say?" Leo paused at the door, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "Keep your eyes open, Private," he said. "You might." That night, he took his post for one last walk before a new rotation. The fog was thick, a familiar embrace. He walked his 21 steps, his heart steady, his mind calm. At the end of the mat, he paused, looking out over the sea of white headstones. No soldier appeared. No visions came. But he felt it. A presence. Not heavy or cold, but warm and peaceful, like a hand on his shoulder, like the winter sun. A feeling of gratitude. Of rest. "Descansa en paz, Will," he whispered into the night. "Rest in peace, brother. We have the watch." He turned, his boots echoing with purpose on the stone. 21 steps. Pause. Turn. The tomb stood watch. And so did he. Leo's story shows that true honor isn't just about discipline, it's about empathy. It's a bridge between generations, built one memory at a time. What does honor mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please comment with respect for the soldiers and their families. If this story moved you, share it to keep their memories alive, and subscribe for more stories that matter.